This is Vivek and Samad from the Product Management and Technology Club of IIM Calcutta. We bring you a full session of collabs with IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Bangalore, and IIM Lucknow. Today we have with us PM from Media.net who will be delivering the talk on sustainability, a data-driven approach. We'll get a unique perspective on dealing with these issues from an ad-tech POV and gain insights on industry that is vastly different from the consumer inside internet first. Over to you, Samad.
All right. So we have with us Aditya Pante, who's the group PM at Media.net. He's had a career spanning across companies like MX Player and Media.net, where he's been a product manager. He's a alum of IIM Calcutta and NSIT Computer Science, and he's also the co-founder of Indie Bazaar. Next, we have Rahul Ranjan, who's a product manager too at Media.net, who's from IIT Guwahati and alum of SPJIMR. He's had a work experience at Oracle before doing his MBA and at Media.net ever since. And lastly, we have Piyush Lahoti with us, who's from IIT Indore and an IIMA alum. He's worked at CA Tech and Housing.com before joining Media.net. So over to you, Aditya.
Hey, thanks so much. First off, thank you very much for having us here. I think that it's a great initiative. It's about time that something like this started across IIMs, and I hope that this sort of helps students and everyone in the community understand and get closer to what the market demands. While brainstorming and while trying to figure out, what we should talk about, we thought that we should try and give a perspective which is, unique to AdTech, which a lot of other product management folks do not experience on a day-to-day basis, and which is very different from, and our version of being data-driven is very different from other PMs that we see from consumer internet companies. So we thought that AdTech and us being uniquely placed, we might be able to give a unique perspective of how to be data driven and what it means to be data driven in our case. Okay, let me just move on to the next slide. Okay, so we'll try to first set some context about what we mean and what are the key takeaways that we hope to deliver today. We'll share some experiences and examples. We'll challenge some of the common notions that are there, and we'll introduce some of tools and frameworks which probably will be able to help everyone, get some insights on how to be more data driven or how to approach such problems. I think the product which we represent is unique. If you talk to any user, no one is going to say great things about an advertisement unless and until it's a high impact, TV ad, which we see on television or YouTube or some video creative which goes viral. Traditional display ads that we see across the internet, no user has really an opinion about it, other than that, in general ads are bad. And I experienced it extensively at MX Player when I used to go through tons of user feedback on the App Store. But what we don't get is real user feedback. Another way it is unique is that ad inventory is perishable. If a user visits a web page and we fail to show an ad for whatever reasons, that impression is gone. We will not be able to monetize that impression again. The trade-offs that we have are simple. Trade-offs like build a feature which increases revenue versus cost of building that feature, or trade-off between revenue versus performance. We build a great algorithm, but which increases revenue, but at the same time it reduces performance. So such trade-offs are simple to think about and visualize. However, the supply chain that we work with and I'm not sure if everyone is well versed with the ad tech ecosystem or not, but the supply chain that we have is extremely complicated with multiple agents working independently across the internet, and there are standards. However, those standards also have a lot of customizations, and each agent in the supply chain is believed to work towards its own profits or its own incentives, and cooperation and competition exists always. Um, yeah. The other reason why it is unique and why it needs to be extremely data driven is that measuring all outcomes is extremely hard. There are only a certain number of measurable outcomes available, which we have to run with, and all information is not available at a time. So this is why we thought that ad tech is unique in comparison to some of the other products or the other consumer internet products that are there. And we think that because of such reasons, the reason why we are data driven and the kind of problems that we solve or try to solve are uniquely placed. So coming back to this point of discussion, wherein we wanted to say that how do we take decisions with certain risk, uncertainty, and under ambiguous situations. So we define risk as so we try to define risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity differently. It might sound similar and it might sound overlapping, but in our minds we think of it as three different things. Risk is a situation where we are able to quantitatively measure uh, the different possibilities that are there and the probability of each of these possibilities happening. Uncertainty for us is where all possible states of occurrence or the probability of their occurrence is not foreseeable with certain confidence. And ambiguity is, I think, more prevalent with us at times, wherein there is not enough information for us to have an opinion or to be able to define a distribution of probabilities, saying that okay, these are the outcomes that we can expect, and this is the expectation of results, so on and so forth. So we have three different ambiguities that we try to deal with. One is the ambiguity of different outcomes, ambiguity of different metrics, and priorities. Ambiguities of different priorities is when you look at a particular goal or an outcome, it is not very clear on what that means, and we'll give examples along the way so it's clearer. Ambiguity in metrics is about what metrics we need to measure to look at performance, and ambiguity of outcomes deals with the expectation of different results. Okay. So when we think about problems, and I wanted to kind of create a generic problem statement so that everyone can relate to it. Imagine that you're playing a lottery, and if you win, the prize is another lottery ticket, and consider the problem to be like a chain of such lottery tickets. And as you iterate through the chain, you unearth new lotteries whose outcome is also not clear. So in such situations, what we find is that rationalizing the problem set at hand is extremely hard. Uh, at times, the behavior of different metrics or different measures that we look at is unpredictable. It is often non-linear in nature. Since there are multiple agents in play, their behavior is not dictated by the behavior of the system. They are self self motivated and motivated to sort of work towards their own incentives. And we also see that all the agents in our supply chain are extremely intelligent and adaptive, and they learn and as they gain experience and change behavior over time. To give you an example of how our agents are adaptive, think of uh, let's take an ad as an example. Whenever we display an ad, there is an auction which happens behind the scenes, and in that auction, different signals are sent to different demand partners who are responsible to show and respond with a bid price which takes part in an auction and an advertisement. Now, the signals that we get as an input uh, define what sort of bid price agents are expected to give out. So if you send a very rich request, for example, give a lot of details, a lot of information to these demand partners, and they look at a large amount of information to respond with a price and an ad back. They're expected to get more and more information and be more intelligent and perform better over time. And when we try to do that, all agents are not similar. All agents' capabilities are not similar. Therefore, we see a lot of difference in performance. So there is no one size sort of fits all scenario here. Uh, Okay, so given that we've set a very broad context of the problem statements, and we've created a generic problem statement of why we need to be why data driven. So everyone would agree that data driven is good, but uh, what kind of problems we uniquely face, and what kind of industry we come from. Being data driven is hard and is a little different because of these following reasons. Now, what we'll try to do is to go through certain examples, and hopefully we drive the point across with these examples, and Rahul will kind of take us through these. Over to you, Rahul.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for the detailed overview. In the next few slides, we'll look into few real-world examples to maybe get a sense of how, what role data plays in product management and product decisions. Now, before we go into examples, I'm just going to quickly talk about few ways in which folks knowingly or unknowingly take product decisions across the industry. To resolve these ambiguities that Aditya described, to resolve some of these ambiguities, like which features to build, what metrics to chase, we often end up following suggestions given by our peers or senior management. That's one of the factors that most of you who might have some experience in past might relate to. You sort of end up using those decisions, or those factors act as a big influencer in your decision. That is one. Second is based on intuition. Now, a good intuition is a great skill. There's no denying that. But it gets very risky if you do not validate your ideas. So that's another way folks generally take product decisions. Third is based on what a few customers says. When I say a few customers says, it is some of the user feedback, but they are more sort of an anecdotes rather than maybe an extensive quantitative survey. Then looking at a high-level aggregated data set. Let's say, for example, you did something, you try to roll out a feature, or you try to test out a feature, and you were just looking at maybe a very high-level aggregate metric, maybe revenue or maybe some conversion metric you are tracking. That is another. And the last one is mostly what a data-driven approach stresses on. It's like you work based on the insights that you derive out of large data sets. And when I say insights, these are mostly some actionable insights that you derive from a large set of data. Now, Piyush will later take you through some of the ways in which how you go about deriving these insights out of these large data sets. But before we do that, I'll just walk you through a few examples. Now, next, Aditya, next slide. Yeah. Now, let me start with a non-ad tech example. I know most of you folks out there may not have exposure to ad tech, but this could be a simple example to understand how maybe data is gold. Now, let's say this in this example, we are essentially tackling ambiguity about metrics and priorities. Now, let's say there is an e-learning platform, maybe just something like a Coursera or something, where the platform success metric is essentially courses per user. Like as many users sign up and they subscribe to courses, they enroll into courses. That drives your top line, and that becomes your then that's your success metric. Now, to drive this success metric, as of now, let's say you have been given two workflows. One is a sign-up flow, where you are getting new users sign up and they subscribe to a course or enroll into a course. And then there is a workflow B, where after completion of a course, you get user to subscribe to another course. So there's a funnel where a new user comes in and you convert that user, and there's an existing user which you're trying to make generate more revenue out of. Now, both these metrics, let's say given this example, the workflow A, the key metric, which is like the sign up conversion rate, is hovering somewhere around 20%. Basically, out of all the folks who sign up, only 20% people are converting. Basically, they are enrolling to the courses. Workflow B, where let's say, for example, the conversion post course completion is somewhat hovering around 30%. Basically, people are re-enrolling to courses in 30% of the cases. Now, looking at the sign-up flow, what generally sign-up flow entails? Like, you get users to sign up, you set profile for the users, you share details of the course the user searched for, and you ensure that you have a seamless subscription or enrollment process, so that user can get to start the courses as soon as possible. For the course completion goal, you would want to give a good recommendation that suits user needs, so that they can they relate to what to do next, what course should I do next, things like that. Now, if this is a current situation where a sign-up flow has a 20% conversion rate and a course completion flow at 30% conversion rate, and you have been given a task to increase the overall metric of courses per user, which one will you go about? What's going to prioritize? This is ambiguity of priority. Whether you're going to work on the sign-up flow or the course completion flow. A very high-level intuition tells you that I should be working on the sign-up flow because two things. One is the metric is not performing that well. Second, new users are key. Like getting new users is a user has a lifetime value, and a user have a lifetime value, and if you get a new user to convert, it may help you get them to enroll into more courses in future. So that's the problem statement as of now. Aditya, next slide. Yeah. So now the sign up conversion rate is terrible. You need to build up features to improve the workflow. And that's like the obvious thing that any product manager would generally go about. Now, these are just some anecdotes. Like you may hear from your peers, or maybe even you can think like, maybe you can improve the design to enhance the user experience. Maybe the current state of the whole onboarding process is that there is no indication of steps, and users might be dropping off due to some lack of clarity, and you should maybe have a steps train to help user inform through the process and minimize drop off. Basically, you tell users, hey, you are at these many steps and only few steps are left, so that users have a track. If you go to users, get their feedback, you might get some more insights. Like some of them may straight away say that the courses are expensive. Few folks maybe want free trials and things like that. These are these are the some of those approaches that we just discussed in the previous slide, where how traditionally we work. I mean, we traditionally try to get ideas to propose features. Next slide, Aditya. Interestingly, maybe in some cases this happens. Like if you look at the data, you would realize that you are using metric that's even complete. For example, in this particular case, maybe the sign up rate, the sign up conversion metric is not that terrible. What if a lot of lot of the signups that are happening are bot signups, and the real users who are signing up, the conversion rate in that case is pretty great. It's pretty good. So let's say the data says that a real user sign up conversion rate is somewhere around 60 to 70%. Now suddenly, looking at that data, the whole priority changes. If you were looking in, if you were not looking into the data, you might have been, and you might have it might have happened that you would have ended up chasing a wrong set of features to drive wrong metrics, and you would have ended with maybe very minor improvement in the whole funnel. So this is one of those examples, in like real world examples, where looking at what user says or what intuition seems to be true might not really work. Sometimes you do have to dig into the data to get something that nobody is that you might overlook otherwise. Now, once you have established this, for example, then suddenly your priority is clear. Like your next prioritized feature would be maybe a simple robotic activity check feature during sign up, something like a captcha or a reCAPTCHA on a sign up page that sort of decreases a robotic sign up. Also, now your focus could be on the course completion flow, because you see that, hey, the metric there is 30, the conversion rate there is 30%, and the sign up flow already has 60-70%. So if I do something substantial, if I put more focus, I would be able to drive that metric much more. And obviously you also end up resolving the metric ambiguity. Basically, from sign up conversion, you now get to valid sign up conversion. So this is this is like a non-ad tech example, which hopefully maybe some of you able to connect. Next. Now let's look into let's take a look into ambiguity about outcomes. Now here's a poll. The question is, which of the two ad segment, like the traditional banner or linked unit, you feel a user is most likely to engage with? I'm gonna give like around 30 seconds. Okay, interesting. So 68% of the users say that ad one is is something that users, 69%, like 69% of folks say that the traditional banner ad is is that ad where user is most likely to engage with. I mean, it's fair, like given that given that the flashy look it has, and I'm not wrong when we reach out to publishers also, they look at a good looking banner and they see that it looks aesthetically pleasing and it portrays an image that will connect with users, and they also believe the same, like as you guys say. But having said that, what if I told you that the linked units on the right hand side, the ad 2, they have in general in some cases 10 times more engagement rate, conversion rate than the ad on the right, ad on the left. Like the linked unit, the linked units have traditionally, based on the data, the researchers, they have shown to perform almost 8 to 10 times more than traditional banner when it comes to conversion. Now, intuition fails. Like you would be like, hey, how is this happening? This is like a nice looking ad. Everybody would want to get engaged with this ad. But that's not the case. Data says it otherwise, and that's the reality. Now, this is one of the major reasons why data plays a key role in ad tech. Because even if you reach out to users, even if you start taking feedback, it's not really going to help, because intuition says the first ad looks better or works. It's going to work better, but generally doesn't work that way. Aditya, can we go to the next slide? Okay. Now, having said that, it just doesn't end there. The story doesn't end there. If you look at this, these two ads, this is now a version of the ad 2 that we saw in the previous slide. Now, even within that version, we may have two sort of templates that we can form. One is more native looking, how map to the website that we have here, and another one is not so native. It's like out of the place. Now, among these two, again, if I ask you which one is going to perform more, when I say perform, as in users going to engage with which one most which one the user is most likely to engage with. Now, again, the question is open for you. So based on 50 votes, we have around 73% saying the ad 1, which is the more native look and feel ad, is going to perform better. Now, again, sorry to break your heart, that's not the case. The ad on the right hand side, which is a bland ad unit, works. The data has proven that that works better than this one. Now, obviously, it defies the intuition, but why so? Like, you always end up asking why so. Aditya, next slide. Okay. Yeah, like I said, like the intuition, the native look and feel, the better user experience, and mostly like the seemingly logical continuation of the content. I mean, the look and feel of the content that's there on the website. The left side, they should have been performing better, but they do not. Now, data indicates. Now, there are two ways to take next steps, like to get the actionable insight out of this. One is, maybe you need to consider the ways that you're not thought of and try to introduce parameters in your product. Now, why specifically I have brought this up is because this template can be an engine, a templating engine that tries to determine what sort of look and feel your ad is going to get. And this can be an auto template engine. Now, when you are creating a product like an auto template engine, you need to be able to think of the features you're going to add so that there is a variation in these templates. Now, if you never knew about this sort of a variation, and if you were never convinced about this, you would have never built a native versus aggressive sort of a feature. You would have always thought, hey, native looking things works, so let me run A/B testing only within the native sort of ads. But you would have never considered the aggressive field. But based on the data, we see that no, aggressive also works. Now, having said this, there can be reasons behind this. Like if you go dwell deeper into this this outcome, you would realize how in some cases or in some kind of content, an aggressive ad unit works out well, especially in the cases where the content has a lot of images. A native sort of gets lost in the content, and there mostly the template which has slightly aggressive behavior, they stand out, and hence they users tend to engage more with that, and they don't miss them as a blind spot. in the content if they're scrolling. So that's again an insight out of this data. But again, you must be looking at the data at this level uh, uh, to draw any conclusion. Uh, uh, like I think these were the two examples that I had. Next, I think Piyush can take you through the methodologies that we follow in these kind of tests that we run to derive insights. Over to you.
Thanks, Rahul.
Yeah.
Yeah, so very counterintuitive examples Rahul showed us. I'll just walk through the approach we take when we use data to make our decisions. Some of the key things are, again, all your iterations, all the experiments should be, you should run multiple iterations to conclude the decision you are trying to reach. But it should be very incremental. They should be small and very precisely measurable. Ultimately, you are failing. Adapt with each iteration. Every time, if you are getting some inferences, incorporate that, and you can improve the experiment design as well. And ultimately, the data. So I was going through my LinkedIn feed, and a few days ago, I found this opinion piece by someone who's working in product, obviously, for a long time, and very clearly saying that the ability to represent the user, not incorrect per se, but I would say that you should have the faith in data that in case the data is not backing up the same point, should be brave enough to go against it. Again, what Rahul showed sort of reinforces the same point. It's good to start with what the user is saying and use that as something we call as the hypothesis. Aditya, we can move to the next slide. The user's feedback is that's good hypothesis to start off. For example, the there, but in case if the data says okay, now that's not okay, believe in the data. Another strong point which we would like to convey, which is very currently see those occurring. The hypothesis to the course we have on hypothesis, probability, statistics in the first year. This becomes very useful here. The hypothesis should be built in a manner that it can be tested very easily. So easy simulation or emulation of whatever you are trying to think of. And if you don't have the indicators, if you don't have the variables, use some proxy indicators to sort of reflect the same hypothesis. Told you how to generally what we mean is the CTRs in the ads. Now consider it this way. Sorry, guys, you are still able to hear me, right?
Yes, I can now hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so consider it this way. Now, if you know that one hypothesis is the position of the ad also makes a lot of difference. If the ad is on top of the page, on bottom of the page, the performance could be drastically different. Left, right, center, performance can be drastically different. Building a full-blown system to validate that hypothesis is difficult. You will need to, you cannot really map one ad unit to a position, a specific XY coordinate. So it will become very difficult difficult to validate this hypothesis. What you can do is simplify this into very small set. Like instead of validating, so simple concept. I will just define if the ad unit is on the first occurrence of the page, I will define that as top. If it's not, I will define that as bottom. And now if I wrap the ad units in these two buckets, will the performance change if the ad is top of the page or bottom of the page? I've reduced the complexity of this experiment drastically, and I can lead to some results which can be helpful in either continuing the experiment forward, or we can get very easy results to exit the experiment. Another thing is A/B testing is very popular, and A/B testing gives very clear results on who should be the winner if we are experimenting something. But even A/B testing can be a bit inconclusive at times. So most of the variables we deal with, they will have some sort of variance or standard deviation. And what that means is, assume that one of your metrics is just 4% higher in the B bucket as compared to the A bucket. Does that mean that definitely the B bucket is better? Or it could be some randomness which bias the results in the B bucket. So to resolve that, another approach which has become popular now is the AABB test, where instead of having only 2 buckets, we create 4 buckets, 25% in the control set, and 25% in the latter set. And if we see that the test is performing better in both the buckets, then okay, we can conclude with a higher confidence that that our experiment is working. Then there's multivariate analysis. There are a lot of variables we would deal with. Let's take an example. Aditya said that the supply chain is super complex in ad tech. And it becomes very difficult for us to figure out what is the cheapest way to procure ads. Consider a simple marketplace. You want to figure out the cheapest supplier. Now, there are different variables which can bias the results, like the time you are analyzing, or the geography you are analyzing, or something like the particular the website where you are analyzing. So all these externalities need to be isolated to some extent so that you can conclude the experiment in a better manner. And then there's, of course, causation versus correlation. We can versus an interdependence analysis to figure out whether the variables are just correlated or they are causing effects in each other. For example, let's say one of our demand partners, another example, let's say end of the month, we generally observe that we see very high bids from the advertisers coming in. Everyone's willing to pay very high premiums. The reason behind that is the campaign pacing. These advertisers typically have monthly campaigns. So entire month, they pace it in some fashion, and end of the month, when everyone's goals are not met, they just go crazy. They go wild and start bidding a lot higher as compared to the usual days. So Media.net observes higher bids or higher ads coming into the platform, premium ads coming into the platform. The same goes with the industry. That can point to a correlation that the higher the bids, the lower is our chances to winning an ad in the market, because the competition will be higher and everything will be difficult to procure. But that's not really a correlation. If we bid higher, if we bid more, we are definitely more probable to get an ad as compared to bidding lesser. So that's the key difference between causation and correlation. There could be two phenomena occurring simultaneously, but may not be the cause. We can move to the next slide. Yeah. Now, some of the key metrics. Again, it's an important process when you are being very data driven, to identify what you want to track, how do you want to measure the experiment. The metrics come in very handy there. First is, I think, a good process. Again, this can be useful for even the user obsessed industries. Is to first understand the user journey. There are very different frameworks to do that, different steps on how the user proceeds into the product, and understand the objective in each of these steps. The framework I'm using is called a 5E framework. Entice, enter. So when the user, you first have to lure the user to come to your product. The user should be onboarded. Once the user is onboarded, keep ensuring that the user is retained. Even if the user is exiting, there should be a proper exit process. And after the user has completed the transaction or completed the relationship with your product, even then you can extend the relationship. You can try to bring the user back into your product, etc. The objective is different. Like what the example Rahul gave regarding courses, online courses. The one step was to simplify the sign up process. Another step was to simplify the subscription after the user has signed up. So objectives can be very different, and your metrics should indicate those objectives very clearly. And ultimately, it should boil down to one or two quantifiable entities which can very clearly represent your objectives. Another thing is the feedback loops which can impact performance. So consider a thing like this, again going back to the cheapest supply path example. uh, Cheap supply would lead to more successful transactions. Why I say that is, if you are procuring the goods in a cheap manner, you are more probable to complete the transaction. If you're completing more transactions, the chances are higher that your demand partners will also be happy with you in terms of performance, because now you have a big pool of goods which you can sell as compared to the earlier situation. Uh, if the performance is better, your demand partners or the buyers, they will have a higher paying propensity. But then it's sort of a feedback loop here when if the entire market is ready to pay higher, the suppliers will increase the prices. If the suppliers increase the price, the entire effect we've seen earlier, that will just revert itself, and the paying propensity will decrease. So it's sort of a stable equilibrium. But now consider this: if you are running an experiment in this kind of environment, there are so many variables which can completely drastically change your result. These feedback loops should also be considered when you are designing the experiment and measuring the success of it, so that you can attribute what is going on when you are observing a phenomena. Let's move to the next slide. After you've decided what are the key metrics for you, what would you like to measure? These key metrics again show variance with several variables, and these variables are also which you should decide as your data dimension. These could be things like geographical, like for example, let's say you expanded to a new market. It could be Netflix expanding to India. Suddenly they observe that everyone's reusing the account and their user retention metrics go crazy. But if they can isolate India and see that the credentials, they can very easily figure out, okay, what is happening here? Why are our metrics going high, but it's a typical phenomena belonging to one geography? It could be infrastructural, something which can be specific to, let's say, your desktop or your mobile, or any specific browser or environment. It could be based on your acquisition method. If you are trying to organically drive users to your product, there could be difference in behaviors which can point to different phenomena coming in. It could be demographical. For example, let's say gender, males behaving very differently as compared to females, or some other kind of demographic split which can point to the data difference. And it doesn't, the list doesn't stop here. Obviously, there are a lot of other dimensions which you will be able to figure out. But again, you should consider and shortlist the set of dimensions which you would like to consider when you are completing your data analysis. Let's move ahead. Another thing to note is trend and performance. Now, performance is to track the aggregate behavior of your system. Customer A is doing really well, customer B is not doing really well. It gives you a snapshot of data, and it will help you understand what is the strong or weak area in your system. Trends will define the chronological movement of the metrics. It will give you a relative performance idea if you are doing well as compared to last week or last month. So these two are again very different data analysis processes, which you should consider separately when you are evaluating data. Let's move ahead, Aditya. And alerts, of course. The rise and drop in all the, so you've finalized your metrics, you've finalized your dimensions, you've finalized the performance or the trend chart which you would want to monitor. And after that, if there is a rise or drop in the important indicators, that suggests that, okay, there's something wrong in the system, or there's something really good in the system. And you should be able to track that very precisely. Here again, one key advice is, if you choose the metrics which are very sensitive, there will always be something going here and there. You will always feel either things are going really good or things are going really bad, and you will be always occupied in investigating what's happening. If you choose very insensitive metrics, then you would never notice if something has gone wrong. So it's key to balance between the two and choose the metrics in a manner that they can rightly point out problems or good phenomena when something is happening. Yeah, let's move to the next slide. So finally, we've spoken about different things to be considered when you are being data driven and when you are doing data analysis in a product management environment. Some of the tools which can be used. One popular method to log the data and log the events are pixel-based logging. This is a simple one-by-one image which is fired on the page, and they track very important behaviors about what is happening. Google Analytics is sort of the pioneer in doing that. There are other tools also like Heap and Looker, which provide similar services. Data management and visualization. Now there are popular tools there: Tableau, Power BI, Google Data Studio, etc. And for alert management, PagerDuty is sort of the industry leader. But there are alternatives to that. Opsgenie and VictorOps are some noticeable alternatives there. So I think the idea here, I think what we've gone through is how we can do data analysis and be data driven in the product management environment, and some of the key things we require to do that. Over to you, Aditya.
Thanks, Piyush. Hopefully, the narrative extends, and it helps you understand that being data driven has different meanings and different contexts in different industries within product management as well. We all work in sort of a complex adaptive system wherein there is no clear deterministic solution available always. We deal with risks related to revenue, users going out of the funnels, we deal with uncertainty in terms of whether measurable impact is directly available or is not available all the time. And we deal with ambiguity in terms of different methodologies or outcomes or metrics. So we rely on certain data-driven approaches to sort of navigate, help us navigate through this, and help us take some certain decisions on a day-to-day basis. And the idea is to break up the problem into smaller, measurable subsets, run small, nimble experiments iteratively, and across iterations, you continue to make changes to the system, measure external, external as well as internal impact, and over time are able to move to a system where you're able to optimize your key metrics and your KPIs. That's all that we had, and let us know if you have any questions. I do read some of these questions in the group. Samarth, should we just address them right now, or how do you want to take questions?
Yeah. So sure, you can just pick up any question that you like, and we've also shared those with you, so you can answer those.
Okay. So can you give some examples of player in ad tech stack, DSPs, SSPs, media agencies, and businesses and their KPIs? So DSPs, common DSPs are MediaMath, Trade Desk, Verizon has a DSP. Almost any large ad tech player has a DSP, whether small or large. SSPs are AppNexus, now Xandr, OpenX, Rubicon. Media agencies, WPP, Omnicom, Publicis are some of the examples. And key metrics for DSPs are to drive advertiser spend, and a return on ad spend metric, which they sort of work along with the agencies or the trading desk with. Similar KPIs for media agencies. I think a lot of these times advertiser spend is a large KPI for them, which denotes successful and large media agencies. And for SSPs, I think it's more to do with how much publisher spend and publisher RPMs are able to drive. I hope that answers your question, Milan. Next question is Shubhankar Yash. How do you arrive at benchmarks for these metrics? For example, how do you determine 60% conversion rate is good? That is a very good question. It is very hard to benchmark metrics or come up with benchmarks, as these are moving targets in most cases. So what we do is we have a bias for action. We start with a basic version of an experiment, and let's say the first iteration benchmark is not running an experiment versus running experiment. This should yield positive results. And the result of the first experiment, the first iteration that we do, feeds into the design and benchmarking of the second experiment. And we continue to do this till the incremental benefit of running each iteration sort of starts diminishing, and the cost of running the experiments becomes higher. While doing so, we need to understand two things. One is, when we run a controlled sort of experiment and when we scale it, the impact in some cases might be very different. However, the trends should be similar. The scale might change, but trends should look the same across time. And we should always remember to normalize, compare, and look at normalized results. I hope that answers your question, Shubhankar. And the next question is from Nimish. How to connect these engagement metrics to the metrics measuring business outcomes or directly related to revenue? So in ad tech, like I said, the trade-offs are sort of easy to understand. It's largely revenue driven. So any engagement driven metric in ad tech results in a metric which is directly attributed to revenue. In most consumer internet companies and products, the engagement metrics should yield to more revenues in a long term. There might be some gestation period, but after that gestation period, where a user is mature and is ready to be, ready to become a paying user, or you may want to start using or start monetizing the user. At that time, I think these engagement metrics directly translate to revenue related metrics. But however, there is, I feel, a gestation period there. CTR for the left versus final conversion higher for right. So I think initial CTR is the comparable. I don't think there is the final conversion could be very different. But in this context, we wanted to drive the point that a user engages with the first ad lesser compared to the second ad, which looked a little gaudy and not so pretty looking. Ad examples are same feature wise but are different in design. As a PM, you would only go with design by the design team. However, how does look and feel based data help a PM? In ad tech, there is a design team which designs ads, of course. But since the true north for everyone is to improve revenue and click-through rates for ads, I think when you look at an ad design, you can't have these two things isolated. A PM who owns ad experience, or the kind of templates, or someone who would own a product which is responsible for creating auto templates for ads, would definitely own design and revenue, both aspects for it. If not revenue, at least CTRs. The next question is from Akash. A general question on AdTech. What are good resources to learn end-to-end on AdTech? I think there are a couple of good resources. I think Trade Desk has a free online course now for people who are interested in AdTech. There are some of Google resources which are extremely helpful, but someone who's extremely new to AdTech, I would recommend start with the Lumascape, which basically guides you and tells you what are the different actors and what are the different pieces of the supply chain in the AdTech industry. That should be the first starting point. When you've understood the Lumascape, the next step would be to get an understanding of how the transactions happen. Google or Trade Desk has decent material on that. Any further questions?
All right, I guess that's all the questions for now. Okay, so thanks a lot, Aditya, Rahul, and Piyush for this session. I think we've all learned quite a bit. And if any of you have any other questions, you can still put it on the chat, or you can just email it to us, and maybe we can have them answered later on.
And feel free to reach out to us on our Twitter handle. We'll share the link in the chat. And goodbye, everyone. See you all in the next session.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
Thanks
a
lot.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.